what I say and what you hear be in the name of God. Amen. Doesn't it seem incredible that the disciples didn't recognize Jesus right away? I mean, some people think it is incredible, and they will conclude from that, well, the resurrection appearances must be describing something other than what they're describing. They must be describing some sort of spiritual experience. But has it ever happened to you that you're somewhere and you see someone that you know, but you don't recognize them right away? That's happened to me quite a lot. You see someone out of context, and you're like, where have I seen that person before? And I imagine that seeing the resurrected Jesus is really seeing him out of context. And it doesn't seem incredible to me at all that they had trouble recognizing him, at least at first. The thing is that there's so many Christians that Easter is essentially about Jesus rises from the dead, and then he goes to heaven. And, from there, the stories, and if you behave yourselves, God will love you, and you get to go to heaven too. And the whole thing about the resurrection becomes some spiritual thing about getting away from here and going away to heaven. And it becomes something really other than what the Gospels are telling us it's about. There is, in the Apostles' Creed, which is the creed that we recite at baptism, we say, I believe in the resurrection of the body. Believe in the resurrection of the body. Now, we can say, well, no one rises from the dead. Well, just in case you were in doubt, people didn't rise from the dead in the first century either. I mean, they knew as much about death as anybody else, and it's just not something that people expected. And yet, everything about the resurrection appearances is using and describing just that, a bodily life after death, and trying to make sense of it. If we allow the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament to actually tell that story, if we're able to grasp what the resurrection of the body really is all about, then we discover the difference that Easter makes. That this life, and this is an important part of this whole message of Easter, that this life, here and now, has hope, has certainty, and has meaning here and now. There's something about the resurrection of Jesus Christ that led the first Christians to declare with great urgency what we do and how we live here makes all the difference in the world, because it has something to do with what God had started in Jesus, continues in us, and that he will one day bring to its completion in his new creation. So, let's think about the hope that we have. Don't we all hope that after we die, we're going to go be with the people that we love? And I don't know how you imagine that, but I have a hard time imagining being with the people that I love in some sort of spiritual sense without being able to touch them, without being able to hug them, to eat with them, to do the things that I'm familiar with doing with the people that I love. And that's exactly the hope that we have, though, in the Gospels, in the New Testament. We're told that there's a continuity between this stuff and the stuff of resurrection. There is continuity in the resurrection of Jesus. He ate, he talked, he walked, and yet he was different. You could touch him, but you couldn't hold him. He would appear in a room that was closed. As we read in today's gospel, he ate and then would vanish. And yet there's this continuity. It is not a description of some spiritual experience. I mean, it's not as if the people of the first century didn't have language to describe a spiritual experience of someone after they've died. I mean, it was just as common then as it is today. And an example of the kind of language that they could have used to describe the resurrection is actually in Acts. It's in your handout. And the context is that Peter had been arrested by Herod, and Peter's friends assumed that he was going to be executed. Peter gets away and then shows up where his friends are. And Peter knocks at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." And that's the word you use when you have some experience of a loved one who's died, and is somehow you're experiencing the presence of this person, but it's a spiritual experience. It's not a bodily experience. And the language for that, one of the words for that was to say, "Oh, that's so-and-so's angel." And I think it's significant that none of the resurrection appearances bears any resemblance at all to the transfiguration. Remember when Jesus goes up on the mountain and he's transfigured and brilliantly white and shining and glowing, and that's exactly the kind of description we might expect to get if those first Christians were trying to describe some sort of translation of Jesus from an earthly existence to a divine existence. But they don't. They don't describe that at all. It bears no resemblance to the transfiguration. And the whole point that I'm getting at here is that the hope that we have a hope that's just like what we see in Jesus. That just as he was raised from the dead and had this bodily life after death, so we will too. We will too. And I got to say, having just run my first 5K race yesterday and having a very in-my-body experience about that, that something about that is something I can look forward to in heaven. I don't understand how that works. I don't. But I know that the scriptures are telling me that the experience that I have here is going to continue somehow when God brings everything to its completion. There's also a certainty that we have about what God is up to in the resurrection. And here's what I mean. Maybe you were taught this too. Hollywood, when it depicts life after death, often depicts a sort of Platonic dualism of we have this innate immortal spirit that is released at death. And then what happens next is kind of up for grabs. Some people go to heaven right away. Some people go to hell right away. Some people wander around aimlessly trying to figure out what they're supposed to do. And others just sort of hang out and haunt things, I guess maybe so that they can be in TV shows like Ghost Hunters or something. I don't know. But all that strikes me as giving us a very uncertain sense of our future. I mean, will I measure up? Am I going to be good? Am I going to go to heaven? Am I going to go to hell? How does all that work? Is God not in control? Am I just going to wander around not knowing what to do? That scares the devil out of me. I can't imagine going through life with that kind of uncertainty. But the scriptures say that God's in control of life. God's in control of all of life. God's in control of the resurrection. From the moment we die to whatever happens next and whatever God is ultimately doing with all of creation, God is in charge. He is watching over me. His loving, watchful eye is over me, and He is the one who will give me new life. As Paul points out in 1 Corinthians, God gives us a body as He has determined. And finally, there is meaning. Meaning to this life. We had a big funeral yesterday. Janet Cragen passed away earlier in the week, and so we celebrated her life yesterday. And one of the things that I said then, and I'll say again now, is that, if the whole point of Easter is this bit about Jesus rising from the dead and then going off to heaven, and then somehow if we do the right things, that God will love us and we get to go to heaven too. If the whole point, in other words, of Christianity is going away from here to heaven, doesn't it strike you as odd that on the one occasion when Jesus' followers asked him to teach them how to pray, he didn't teach them about going to heaven? He didn't teach them to pray about going to heaven. If going to heaven is so all-important and central to the Christian faith, doesn't it make sense that Jesus would have taken the opportunity to teach them about what is the most important thing? As a matter of fact, I find it inconceivable that Jesus wouldn't have taught them what was in fact the most important thing. And what did Jesus teach them? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Save us from temptation. Save us from times of trial. Deliver us from evil. It's all about here. Every last word of the Lord's Prayer is about here. It's about living life here. Jesus invites us in this prayer to imagine the life of heaven lived on earth by living the way he calls us to live. And watch what this does to Christian ethics. Because most of us were taught, I was taught too, Christians are people who try to be good, and if you're good enough, you go to heaven. But if the Lord's Prayer is right, then the whole motivation and purpose of behaving yourselves is to bring something of the beauty, the majesty, and above all, the love of the one true God to bear on earth as in heaven. That makes all the difference in the world. We've now taken the whole point of behaving, taken the whole point of Christian ethics and changed it from appeasing God, getting him to love us, avoiding punishment, wrath, or worse, and turning it into bringing what is the life of heaven to bear here on earth. That makes all the difference in the world. And I would submit to you that that's precisely why the New Testament is so urgent in its call for us to live godly and holy lives. Because what we do here has something to do with what God is up to and has been up to in Jesus and through his Spirit-filled people ever since. That there is this continuity between what happens here and what God will bring there. So that it's not just this stuff that has continuity into God's future. It's whenever I try to bring the beauty and majesty and love of God to bear on earth as in heaven, somehow that too is going to carry over into God's new creation. And that is what gives life here on earth such powerful meaning in New Testament terms. And that's why when Paul, at the end of that great chapter on resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15, culminates with, always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. What difference does Easter make? Well, I believe in the resurrection of the body. And therefore, life here and now has hope, has certainty, and it has powerful meaning. Amen.